Oh, hello again, everybody. Welcome to part three of the History of Delaware show. Today we're going to wedge Delaware in the Civil War, right in between episode two and the next episode. Episode two, of course, talks about northern and southern Delaware in the 17 and 1800s. The next episode after this one will deal with the 20th century. And so this is a good spot to put its standalone Delaware and the Civil War episode. So we're going to take care of that for you tonight. It's important to remember that Delaware, even though it remains loyal to the Union, it stays with the Union, with the North. It does not secede. Delaware was a slave state. The southern counties of Delaware, Kent and Sussex, being more agricultural than the industrial northern part of Delaware, had slaves. Very few slaves are registered in Newcastle County during this time, but there were several thousand slaves in southern Delaware during the American Civil War and before the war. That history can be seen in Dover, Delaware, just outside of Dover, going south, is the John Dickinson Plantation. And the state of Delaware has worked very hard to reestablish that, rebuild some of the slave quarters, and it's a very good interactive history. You can go down there and you can find out a little bit more about Delaware in the Civil War and the slave period in Delaware. So that's the John Dickinson Plantation on Route 9. You leave Dover and you make a left next time you're on your way south. Check that out. So Delaware remains loyal to the North, but does have slaves. That geographic, that border state issue, and again, the northern versus southern Delaware thing plays out. It should be noted that men from both sides, men fought on both sides, both North and South, Union and Confederacy, from Delaware. The boys from the southern part of Delaware that were loyal to the Confederacy joined regiments from Virginia, Maryland, even a few in Tennessee. They joined a Tennessee regiment. There was no official Delaware regiment in the Southern Confederate Army. In the Northern Army, the Union Army, there were 9 Delaware infantry regiments. There was 1 Delaware cavalry and 1 Delaware heavy artillery regiment. About over 12,000 men from Delaware fought for the North. The numbers are a little shy for the South. From what I could find, a couple of thousand men joined the Confederacy. Those numbers are a little harder to kind of pinpoint. But over 12,000 Delawareans fought for the North in the Union Army in separate Delaware regiments. And those Delaware regiments fought heroically in many of the early battles. They were also at Gettysburg. There is a Delaware monument at the battlefield at Gettysburg that you can check out. Beautiful monument. So Delawareans contributed in the war physically on both sides. The Underground Railroad, also a very important piece of Delaware Civil War history. The Underground Railroad, that was a way for fugitive slaves, runaway slaves, to try to make it to the North, ultimately try to get to Canada. That would have been the ultimate stop. The ultimate goal was to try to get out of the United States to Canada at that time. And so getting over the Mason-Dixon line, getting to Pennsylvania, New Jersey, that was an important goal. And the Underground Railroad ran directly through Delaware, through Wilmington and Dover. In Dover, there was a guy named Samuel Burris. He was the educated son of a non-slave African American, and he actually was arrested, fined. He was to be sent back to the South, but abolitionists bought him back, and he remained free. Died in 1863 in San Francisco while still working on abolitionist causes. Another important Underground Railroad figure, of course, Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman traveled through Delaware many, many times on her way to bringing people to freedom in the North. Delaware was one of her pass-throughs quite often. Also, there was a guy named Thomas Garrett. Thomas Garrett was a Quaker. He saved over 2,500 individuals, helped them get to Pennsylvania and beyond, using his own home as one of the hiding places, one of the stops. It's important to remember that the Fugitive Slave Act, which came before the Civil War began, gave bounty hunters rights to travel north and try to seize, arrest fugitive slaves and bring them back. Many stories of people that were never slaves being arrested and brought back to bondage in the South, brought south, and they had never even come from there. So the Fugitive Slave Act was one of those last straws that broke the camel's back leading up to the Civil War. And the Underground Railroad was a very important thing in Delaware. Thomas Garrett is buried in the Quaker Friends Meeting House Cemetery on 4th Street, now near Del Tech Community College, is where his grave is today. So he should be remembered in Delaware history. So continuing on, the geographic location of Delaware, again, plays an important role here in the Civil War. Early on in the conflict, Abraham Lincoln and his generals were very concerned that the South would take a naval force up the Delaware Bay to the Delaware River and attack or harass Philadelphia. Philadelphia, a very important port at that time. So, construction was done on what was called the tri-fort system, the three-fort system, to protect the city of Philadelphia and Wilmington to a lesser degree. So there is a naturally occurring island in the Delaware River called Pea Patch Island. And on that island, the Delaware Assembly gave permission. The United States Army built Fort Delaware, a very ominous brick and mortar fort, cannons, different artillery pieces set around. And that fort, of course, in the middle of the Delaware River, was combined with forts on both sides of the river. On the New Jersey side, there was Fort Mott. And on the Delaware side, there was Fort DuPont. And those three forts were designed to bear their guns on any ship coming up the Delaware River. It was quite a defensive position. It became very obvious early in the war that the South was not going to be able to have any kind of naval campaign against any northern city. And so early in the Civil War, Fort Delaware was converted to a prison camp. And today you can visit Fort Delaware. If you go to Delaware City, there's a fort, a boat, a ferry called the Delafort, and it'll take you across to the Pea Patch Island. They've done a wonderful job. The state of Delaware has done a wonderful job keeping the property, maintaining it, fixing some things. And today you can go there, especially in the spring and summer months and fall. And you can go and they have reenactors there. They'll walk you through the history of the fort and the prison complex. Many people refer to Fort Delaware as the Andersonville of the North. Of course, Andersonville was the southern prison where thousands of Union soldiers were taken and met their death. And they say that Fort Delaware wasn't much better than Andersonville. And lots of Southerners died there from the conditions there in the Delaware River, especially with winter. When they passed away, their bodies were taken to the New Jersey side, and there is a cemetery at Fort Mott in New Jersey with Confederate soldiers buried there. So Fort Delaware, Fort Mott, and Fort DuPont were designed to originally protect Delaware and Philadelphia from Southern naval campaign, later became a prisoner of war camp, and is today a historical site that you can visit. I encourage you to check it out. It's a very cool thing. Fort Delaware was not the only, and Fort DuPont were not the only forts. There was a small fort, more of a camp. It was called Camp Brandywine, and that was run by the DuPont Company. I mentioned DuPont in the last show. They had started on the Brandywine Creek making black powder. And you can imagine by the time the Civil War comes, the United States government is giving them huge contracts, buying huge amounts of black powder needed for the Civil War to fight the South. And so the DuPont Company becomes a very strategic and important asset to the American government. It was thought, again, since many Southern sympathizers lived in Delaware, that the powder mills would be attacked, or there would be espionage, and someone would try to blow up the black powder mills, the DuPont mills, which would cause great harm to the Union Army. They relied on this black powder, this gunpowder. So Camp Brandywine was established. Today it's on the property's Porky Oliver Golf Course, Wawasset Park, a residential community, right along Pennsylvania Avenue, in that part of northwest Wilmington. That was Camp Brandywine. And there were regiments posted there specifically to protect the black powder mill and that asset that the government needed so much. It was not, again, unheard of that something funny might happen. One of the DuPont family members, a guy named Charles DuPont Byrd, a relative to the DuPont Company, actually wrote a letter to General Lee giving him ideas on how to recruit more Southern sympathizers in Delaware, and some ideas on how to maybe even attack the DuPont powder mills and what damage that would do. So it was not unheard of, and the DuPont Company had to protect itself, and the government had to protect that black powder. And the money that the DuPont Company made from the American Civil War brings it to its next step, the next story in the next episode of what DuPont ultimately becomes. So the Civil War in Delaware, another story of North and South for Delaware as well as for the nation. A lot of history for the Civil War in Delaware. I encourage you to check out some of the sites that exist. It's been nice chatting with you again. Remember to check me out. I'm on Rufo's Social Studies page on Facebook. We also have Donato Rufo, one word, DONATO on YouTube. You can find me there. And I post this on a couple history pages as well. People can check it out. So tonight was the role that Delaware played in the American Civil War. Our next show will be about the 20th century in Delaware and what that looked like. Future shows, I'm going to do a standalone on the Italian-American experience in Delaware. I'm going to do a different show for just the Italians. They'll appreciate that, right? I got a show coming up. My mom and I are going to make some pizzelles for you, show you how that works out. So we still have a couple of shows that are going to come up this summer before I start to get ready for my real job and get a piece of chalk back in my hand and head back over to Del Castle for another year. But this has been a great journey for me. I love connecting with everyone. Stay in touch. Please give me some ideas. Give me some topics that you'd like me to cover. So tonight, Delaware in the American Civil War. More to come. Take it easy, everybody. Okay? I'll see you later. Thanks for watching. And now, we're going to shut it off.